Cryptography is the science of keeping information secure by transforming it into a form that unintended recipients cannot understand. In cryptography, an original human-readable message, referred to as plaintext, is changed by means of an algorithm, or series of mathematical operations, into something that to an uninformed observer would look like gibberish. This gibberish is called ciphertext. Cryptographic systems require some method for the intended recipient to be able to make use of the encrypted message, usually, though not always, by transforming the ciphertext back into plaintext. Encryption is what we call the process of turning plaintext into ciphertext. Crypt may make you think of tombs, but it comes from a Greek word that means hidden or secret. Encryption is an important part of cryptography, but doesn't encompass the entire science. One important aspect of the encryption process is that it almost always involves both an algorithm and a key. A key is just another piece of information, almost always a number that specifies how the algorithm is applied to the plaintext in order to encrypt it. Even if you know the method by which some message is encrypted, it's difficult or impossible to decrypt without that key. This is all very abstract, and a good way to understand the specifics of what we're talking about is to look at one of the earliest known forms of cryptography. It's known as the Caesar cipher, because Julius Caesar used it for his confidential correspondence. The Caesar cipher can be broken down into two cryptographic elements we've discussed, the algorithm and the key. The algorithm here is simple. Each letter is replaced by another letter from later in the alphabet. The key is how many letters in the alphabet you need to go to create your ciphertext. Many variations are possible. For example, with a key of 4, A would become E. A few things should be clear from this example. Encryption like this offers a fairly simple way to secretly send any message you like. The tricky part is that everyone communicating needs to know the algorithm and the key in advance, although it's much easier to safely pass on and keep that information than it would be with a complex codebook. The Caesar cipher is what's known as a substitution cipher, because each letter is substituted with another one. For most of history, cryptography consisted of various substitution ciphers deployed to keep government and military communications secure. Medieval Arab mathematicians pushed the science forward, particularly the art of decryption. Once researchers realized that certain letters in a given language are more common than others, it becomes easier to recognize patterns, for instance. But most pre-modern encryption is incredibly simple by modern standards, for the obvious reason that before the advent of computers, it was difficult to perform mathematical transformations quickly enough to make encryption or decryption worthwhile. During World War II, the Germans used the electromechanical Enigma machine to encrypt messages, and famously, Alan Turing led a team in Britain that developed a similar machine to break the code. Cryptography got radically more complex as computers became available, but remained the province of spies and generals for several more decades. However, that began to change in the 1960s. It was the formation of the first computer networks that started civilians thinking about the importance of cryptography. Computers were talking to each other over the open network, not just via direct connections to one another. That sort of networking was transformative in many great ways, but also made it easy to snoop on data traveling across the network. And with financial services being an early use case for computer communication, it was necessary to find a way to keep information secret. IBM led the way in the late 1960s with an encryption method known as Lucifer, which was eventually codified by the U.S. National Bureau of Standards as the first data encryption standard. As the internet began to grow in importance, more and better encryption was needed, and today a significant portion of data flying around the world is encrypted using various techniques. We've already discussed some of the specific applications of cryptography, from keeping military secrets to transmitting financial data safely across the internet. In the bigger picture, though, there are some broad cybersecurity goals that we use cryptography to help us achieve. Using cryptographic techniques, security pros can keep the contents of data confidential, authenticate the identity of a message's sender and receiver, ensure the integrity of the data, showing that it hasn't been altered, demonstrate that the supposed sender really did send the message, a principle known as non-repudiation. You may recognize some of these principles from variations of the CIA triad. There are numerous cryptographic algorithms in use, but in general they can be broken into three categories: secret key cryptography, public key cryptography, and hash functions. Each has its own role to play within the cryptographic landscape. The Caesar cipher is a great example of secret key cryptography. In the example we used, if encrypted messages were being exchanged between Caesar and one of his centurions, both parties would have to know the key. In this case, how many letters forward or backwards in the alphabet you need to move to transform plain text to ciphertext or vice versa. But the key needs to stay a secret between the two of them. You couldn't send the key along with a message, for instance, because if both fell into enemy hands, the message would be easy for them to decipher, defeating the whole purpose of encrypting it in the first place. Secret key cryptography, also called symmetric key, is widely used to keep data confidential. It can be very useful for keeping a local hard drive private, for instance. Since the same user is generally encrypting and decrypting the protected data, sharing the secret key is not an issue. Secret key cryptography can also be used to keep messages transmitted across the internet confidential. However, to successfully make this happen, you need to deploy our next form of cryptography in tandem with it. In order to function securely, the internet needs a way for communicating parties to establish a secure communications channel while only talking to each other across an inherently insecure network. The way this works is via public key cryptography. In public key cryptography, also called asymmetric key, each participant has two keys. One is public and is sent to anyone the party wishes to communicate with. That's the key used to encrypt messages. But the other key is private and isn't shared with anyone, and it's necessary to decrypt those messages. To use a metaphor, think of the public key as opening a slot on a mailbox just wide enough to drop a letter in. You give those dimensions to anyone who you think might send you a letter. The private key is what you use to open the mailbox so you can get the letters out. Public and private key cryptography algorithms both involve transforming plaintext into ciphertext and then back into plaintext. By contrast, a hash function is a one-way encryption algorithm. Once you've encrypted your plaintext, you can't ever recover it from the resulting ciphertext, referred to as a hash. This might make hash functions seem like a somewhat pointless exercise, but the key to their usefulness is that for any given hash function, no two plaintexts will produce the same hash. This makes hashing algorithms a great tool for ensuring data integrity. For instance, a message can be sent along with its own hash. Upon receiving the message, you can run the same hashing algorithm on the message text. If the hash you produced is different from the one accompanying the message, you know the message has been modified in transit. Hashing is also used to ensure the confidentiality of passwords. If you store a hashed version of a user's password, hackers won't be able to decrypt it and use it elsewhere, even if they do manage to breach your defenses. When a legitimate user logs in with their password, you can just hash it and check against the hash you have on file. Thanks for watching our video. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe. To learn more about the future of cybersecurity, look out for our upcoming videos.